Welcome to Sober Sunrise, a podcast bringing you AA speaker meetings with stories of experience, strength, and hope from around the world. We bring you several new speakers weekly, so be sure to subscribe. We hope to always remain an ad-free podcast, so if you'd like to help us remain self-supporting, please visit our website at sober-sunrise.com. Whether you join us in the morning or at night, there's nothing better than a sober sunrise. We hope that you enjoy today's speaker.
What's up, guys? Hey. I'm Charlie Parker, alcoholic. Man, what a fine-looking crew. Well, that's fine. Yeah, thank you. Oh, boy. Let me turn this thing on. I set a timer to give the newcomers hope. Whew! I tell you, that fire is... it is on me. I mean, boy, welcome. I'm really excited about this weekend. I've been hanging out with Bill for the last couple of days. Let me get some of the housekeeping out of the way, though. Charlie Parker, alcoholic. My sobriety date is March 22nd of 1985, and for that I am truly grateful. And I do have 5 days more than Bill Cleveland. So but I'm not going to make a big deal out of it, because I live in an abusive household where my wife has 5.5 months more than I do, and thinks it's a really big deal. When we get in an argument, sometimes she'll say, "Honey, just stick around for about 5.5 months." It'll be much more clear to you, but my home group is the Primary Purpose Group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Austin, Texas, and we are a big book study group. We meet once a week on Tuesday nights at 7:30. If you're ever in Austin on a Tuesday night, come see us. We'd love to show you the same kind of hospitality you've been showing me since I got here. But we study the big book line by line, week after week, and it's just a lot more fun than it sounds like. There was a time when I would have been like, oh boy, but it really is. We have about 225 people on a Tuesday night studying the big book in our little town, and it tells me that I think real alcoholics are hungry for real solution. Bill picked me up at the airport yesterday. I've been hanging out with him and Zach, and then we picked up Ryan today. And Bill's a good friend, and him and Karen he just talked in Austin at our big citywide meeting, and he stayed at the house, and then so him and Karen and Katie. My wife is Katie, and she sends her regards, and I'm not worth a flip without her. I tell you, I didn't bring a tie. The last time we were not together, I took 2 left shoes from different pairs of shoes with me. That was interesting. There was a time when I wouldn't have been real fired up about a big book study meeting, and I'm going to talk about that tonight. It's real important for me to tell you that I'm not like, I didn't come over from Texas to straighten anybody out, or, not sent down from headquarters to tell you how you're killing people or anything, that's always a real effective message, Oh, so glad you dropped by, had you not come by, we would have just continued killing people, I am a big book guy. I call myself an unapologetic big book thumper, and the reason I say that is because it's just I've been around AA for 28 years. I've been a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous half my life, and I'm 57 years old, and I've done it a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of times where I've been a good example of a bad example, and I've worked this program by hanging around the fellowship, and I've worked it coming out of the big book, and my results have just been a lot better the time that I followed the clear-cut directions out of the book. And that's we're going to talk about that quite a bit this weekend. But tonight I'm just basically going to tell my story. But I want to thank anybody that had anything to do with putting this thing on. I mean, I know Jeff and Scott and Franklin and those guys. I mean, if you've been around AA, if you've ever been involved in one of these deals, you know there's a lot of people that do a lot of work to get something like this to come together. And I want to thank them. And if it's anything like the groups at home, there's also a whole bunch of us that didn't do a darn thing. But we have some ideas about how it could have been done just a little bit better. And that's the fellowship I crave. I don't know. I just can't wait to hear what we're going to talk about this weekend. I like to start off. Get a little jumpy, I mean, and I don't know who's jumpier, me or Bill, because we've been hanging out for 2 days, and for the last 2 days, every time I'd tell a story, they just seemed like they were going down and down. And at one point, he goes, "I'm really not sure this is a good idea." We were really hoping for somebody a little more spiritual, and I was like, "I'm going to get spiritual any minute, I swear." But the jokes just keep coming, and, but I like to start off with a joke just to get warmed up, and because in AA we're talking, especially telling my story. I'm going to talk about my experience from my viewpoint. I hear people say, that we're not going to give you any personal opinion. I'm going to be giving some opinions. I mean, there's some stuff I don't know how else to do it other than some of my opinions are going to show up. But we talk about coming out of our own experience. It says, we're going to talk about what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like now. And when I talk about coming out of my own experience, it always reminds me of this joke about this guy that's driving down a little farm road in Texas one day, and he sees a sign on this fence post, and it says, "Talking dog for sale." And he can't stand it. And he goes up to the farmhouse, and he says, "So you got a talking dog for sale?" The guy says, "Yeah, he's around back." And he wanders around back, and there's this red hound dog laying there by the porch. And he walks up to the dog, and he says, "So you can talk?" The dog says, "Well, I certainly can." And he goes, "How in the world did that happen?" And he goes, "Well, it's an interesting story." He says, "When I was young, I started picking up some speaking skills, and as I got older, I started developing some of the nuances of the language. I started picking up slang and local dialects and that sort of thing. It's made for a fascinating life." He said, "I had a 19-year career with the Drug Enforcement Administration, and I was able to infiltrate some situations that no human agent would have ever been able to get into. And I've eaten in some of the world's finest restaurants, cooking from the finest chefs. I've stayed in some of the best hotels in the world." He says, "But enough about me. The really interesting part, some of my pups have developed foreign language skills and have become international diplomats. And I have 2 pups that are in the United Nations right now. And it's just all in all, it's been an amazing life." And the guy says, "God, it's just been fascinating talking to you." And he goes back up front where that farmer's sitting there, and he goes, "How much do you want for a dog like that?" And the guy goes, "I don't know, $40. And he goes, "Why would you ever sell a fascinating dog like that for $40? And the guy goes, "Oh, none of that crap he told you is true." So it's kind of like that around here. It doesn't really matter how good the story is if it's not my experience. But well, I'm going to put that where I reach. I swear, I've had a flamethrower at my ass before, but never quite like this. Somebody built a fine fire, I tell you. Get a merit badge for that. I don't know. Let's see. Let's get going. Let me see. I had a script. Okay, let's get drinking. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. I live in Austin, Texas now. It's 200 miles south of Dallas, and But I grew up in Dallas, and I come from a pretty normal household. I mean, I didn't. Nobody was drinking. I come from a long line of Southern Baptists, and I don't know what they were saying in that Baptist church, but what I was hearing was God loves you, but you're going to burn in hell, and it wasn't really encouraging. But but my mother was a school teacher. My father was a salesman. My mother taught first grade for 42 years. I was darn well prepared for the first grade. I mean, kind of kicked it pretty good, all the way up to like fifth grade. But I grew up in a pretty normal household. I mean, I don't know exactly what normal is, but I've heard enough fifth steps over the years to know that a lot of people had it a lot worse than I did growing up. I mean, I came from a pretty functional household. I had a sister that was perfect, who was 5.5 years older than I am, and just everything, first chair flautist, drum majorette, National Honor Society, Dal High Symphony Orchestra, and then there's this kind of thuggish little brother. But my mother was a teacher, and education and intelligence was everything. And there was a lot of talk about IQ and potential. And I grew up. Anybody else grew up under the burden of potential? Oh my God! I mean, it was like, why can't you live up to your potential? Why can't you be more like the kid across the street? And I remember thinking, that's flattering, Mom, but I'm really not holding back that much, I mean, you're kind of getting my best shot here, but I will say that 12 years of heavy drinking and extensive use of outside issues will significantly lower people's expectations of you. I mean, by the time I got here, it was like, just get a job, I mean, forget about a career or a profession, just get off the couch. And, but I mean, I didn't start drinking. I think I drank at about 13. I got really drunk. I remember an episode that had a bottle of Cutty Sark involved at a motel in Waco, but I didn't really start drinking until I was 16. Ever since then, I mean, the first time I really got good and loaded, I remember thinking, oh, we're going to do this a lot. And I mean, something significant happened the first time I got loaded. And what I didn't know then was that from that date till I came into AA, drinking and getting loaded moved to the center of my life. And anything that interfered with that was going to get moved out of the way. I never said that out loud, but looking back, that was the deal. If anything got between me and getting loaded, it was going to move out of the way. And this, it's not everybody's story in AA. But I mean, it'd be real macho to stand up here and tell you that I drank a fifth of whiskey every day from that time till I sobered up. That wouldn't be true. But what it is true for me, I don't know, it's not everybody's AA story, but for me, from the time I was 16 until the time I came into AA at the age of 28, I never turned down the opportunity to get loaded one time under any circumstances for any reason. There was never a lot of people had it together a lot better than I did. I was all about getting loaded at every opportunity. There was never a time in my memory where, somebody would pull something out and I'd go, oh, man, it's my mom's birthday today or anything like that. The obsession was on and I would never turn it down. And I ran that way for a long time. I'm a big believer in AA's primary purpose and singleness of purpose, and I talk some about that. I try not, in an AA environment, I don't talk about outside issues. Sometimes I'll mention outside issues or additional issues or whatever the case may be, but the reason for that, and a lot of people, we didn't talk about singleness of purpose a lot when I was coming up in AA, and I never really understood it. In fact, I came in when there was a big fight at this AA club in Austin, and they were saying, they won't let you talk about dope over at the Northland group, and we were all like, well, dope's part of my story, and I'll talk about whatever, I want, and I never really thought about that there's some parts of my fifth step that were also part of my story that I didn't feel quite as compelled to talk about. But, just saying. But the whole thing behind it, nobody was talking about singleness of purpose, and I mean, and we'll talk about it some this weekend. I should tell you before I get too far into this deal that I got some pretty righteous ADD working up here, and there will be times in my talk when I'll say, we'll get back to that later, and what that means is that this is not the right time to introduce that chunk of information into the talk. But when I tell you we're going to get back to it later, we're probably not coming back, I always get real excited when I actually circle back around to one, I go off on little bunny trails and stuff, but singleness of purpose. The short version of it is that AA is about alcoholics working with alcoholics, and we're kind of a one-trick pony in AA. It's a pretty solid trick, but it's most effective when it's drunks working with drunks. And the thing I never really understood about that is the reason that is this identification that takes place when one drunk is talking to another one. And you remember the first time you felt it when I came into AA, the first time I'd been around people that understood why I get so loaded and knew why I get loaded, and they'd quit and they seemed happy about it. And there's an identification that takes place, and it's mentioned on page 18 in our book, where it says, it talks about how we got to be the only group of people that would go to a psychiatrist and pay them $200 an hour and lie to them the whole time. If they say, do you drink? I'm not going to go, yeah, I like to get a case of beer and a half gallon of vodka in the mornings and just see what the day brings after that. I'm going to say, maybe a couple of beers if I'm mowing the yard or something, like I've mowed the yard lately, but it goes on to say wives, parents, and intimate friends even find us more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. But here's where it gets interesting. It says, but the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who's properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. And there's where the key line is right here. It says, until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. So what did it say? It's saying until that understanding is reached, we're really not going anywhere. There's something that happens. And it's funny, my wife and I are both, I told you, she's got 29 years, I got 28, but we both are very fortunate. We get to go around to a lot of conferences and stuff. And one of my favorite little games that we play is, wherever we're going, they'll usually send somebody to come pick you up. And, and you're talking to the guy, and Scott says, hey, I'm going to come pick you up at the airport. And they'll always go, I'm about 5, and I go, don't even tell me. Don't even tell me. Just be in baggage claim. It's a little thing I like to do. And it's this identification, and I can't tell you how many times I've come down the escalator, and you come down into the baggage claim area, and you look around and you go, there's our boy right there. And you walk over there and go, are you Scott? And he goes, yeah, how'd you know? And you're like, that identification is so important that out of all the 12-step programs that are out there, and there's a billion of them. There's Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Overeaters. I even heard there's a lip balm addicts Anonymous, in case anybody's ever suffered from that heartbreaking malady. But I swear, every time you say that, you see one guy with his Carmex going, oh, I feel you, buddy. I don't know. But out of all those 12-step programs, the only difference in any of them is the first half of the first step and the middle part of the 12-step. What I'm powerless over and who I carry the message to. That identification is that important. So, I sponsor a lot of guys, and hopefully you'll never hear any of them say in a meeting, I'm an alcoholic and anything, because it doesn't matter. Saying that I'm an alcoholic and an addict would be like saying I'm an alcoholic and a contractor, or an alcoholic and a Texan, or whatever it is, because, in that AA meeting, what we're identifying as is alcoholics. Just like if I go to a CA meeting, I would identify as a cocaine addict or something like that. And I never heard anybody breaking that down much for me. But for the bulk of the weekend, I'll talk about I will say the shortest version of my story, and I don't have enough time to talk a whole lot about my story. There's some really funny episodes that happened, and we were talking about some of them over at Bill's house last night, and I mean, some of that stuff's just funny, but the shortest version of my story is that the guys that I drank with thought that I did way too much outside issues, and the guys that I used with were shocked by my drinking. So everybody thought I was getting a little too loaded. There wasn't anybody surprised when I wound up in AA. There wasn't anybody going, really, I never even knew you had a problem. It's just like, oh, thank God. Listen to what those people say. But I started using it at about 16. And I really didn't need you guys until I was about 17, probably. It was pretty ragged, pretty fast. But there was some years, the book, all this is, I'm going to be working out of this, and all this is here, my sponsor owns a book bindery. My sponsor's Myers R. in Dallas, and before he passed away, my sponsor was Mark Houston. But Myers just took a large print copy of the big book and took the stories out of the bag. But all this is a large print copy of the AA big book. And I work a lot out of this book. This is one of my most prized possessions. And after hearing so much stuff in the discussion meetings for a while, it's nice to go back and reference some of this stuff. Because right there on the title page is the first promise in the big book. And I'd missed it for a long time. It says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And there was a time in my sobriety when if somebody said they were a recovered alcoholic, I'd have been like, man, you better not say that. It's like walking under a ladder or something. You'll be drunk by sundown if you say you're recovered. But what are we talking about having recovered from? And we'll talk about that a lot in the morning when we talk about the first step. But the way it rolled out for me was it worked really well for a while. The alcohol brought about a change in me that was really welcome. I've been needing a drink a long time before I ever got my hands on one. And from the moment I started doing it, it was like, I was all about it. And it started getting kind of sloppy. The book talks about how we start losing the power of choice and control. On page 24, it says something really interesting. It says, we pass into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of no avail. I always found that interesting, that a desire to stop drinking will get me a front row seat in any AA meeting. But right there on page 24, it tells me that it won't do a darn thing to keep me sober. It says, I pass into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. And it goes on to say that at certain times, I can't bring into my consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. When I started off drinking, things were going good. I liked it. I was running with some guys that we were doing a lot of import-export business, and money was flowing, and, we had the jet boats and cars and color TVs and motorcycles, and, you couldn't tell me anything. And it started running a little sloppy, and I noticed that I got a little more loaded than most of those guys did, like one night, I was a blackout drinker. Any other blackout drinkers here tonight? I just thought you were supposed to, I was drinking for oblivion every day, and I blacked out several times a week. I was kind of proud of my driving. If you're blacking out 3 or 4 times a week and you only have a wreck every few months, I thought I was doing pretty good, but there's a lot of crash sites I can point out around Dallas, where I hit that tree or I ran into a lady here. There's some more of those stories that are really funny, but we just don't have time to tell them. But one night I left this bar in a blackout in Dallas, and I should tell you that I was driving my mother's car. I was so poorly treated as a child that I ran away from home for good at the age of 28. I'm serious. Never went back. But I left this bar in her car one night, and And the way I came out of the blackout was there'd been a collision. And it was one of those nights where my field of vision was only about that big, and everything out here was real fuzzy, and I could see a fender sticking up in the air, but I'm rolling, and I keep my foot on the gas, and I go down the street, and I pull the car around the corner, and for some reason my shoes were over in the passenger floorboard. I didn't have my shoes on, and I reached over and I grabbed my shoes, and I go running back. I'm going to run back to the bar to report the car stolen. And it's important to say this was not an extraordinary night. This is just kind of me doing my deal the way. But I'm going to run back and report the car stolen. And as I'm running back to the bar, I'm running under these trees with my shoes in my hand, and I look over and there's two cops, and they got those big flashlights, and they're shining them down like this, and there's twinkling glass all in the street. And as I'm running along, I remember thinking, man, they got here fast, so I go back and I report the car stolen. The next morning they said, Mr. Parker, you're going to have to take a polygraph test to pick your car up. And I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, it was involved in an accident before it was reported stolen. And I said, you're kidding. And they said, no, they ran into a parked police car. And I remember thinking, that explains how they got here so fast, Because I'd been really fuzzy on that one, Norm Alpe used to talk about seconds and inches, about how our lives were saved and changed by seconds and inches. And I got dozens of stories like that where, if those two cops had happened to have been standing there that night, you might have a different speaker up here tonight. But it started going, but I'd shake that off and I'd keep moving and another thing, when I started losing the power of choice and control, I didn't really understand what was happening. And a lot of this stuff I usually talk about when we're talking about step one, and we may cover some step one tonight, and then we can move a little further tomorrow. But the book spends the doctor's opinion. Our whole recovery program is in the first 103 pages of the book. Really. The doctor's opinion in the first 103 pages. The back chapters are very important, but they're like, to wives, working with others. To wives, family afterwards, to employers, and a vision for you. So the bulk of our recovery program is in those first 103 pages on the doctor's opinion, and they spend almost half of that talking about step one. Because I think I'm going to save that for in the morning. This is a tightly run machine up here, but I can't help but talk about it a little bit tonight because I didn't really realize what was going on, and I didn't realize that I was losing the power of choice and control. And what happened? I was a big fan of pawn shops. Any other pawn shoppers here tonight? My people, I loved everything about the pawn shops. Because there was a purity of the equation that really appealed to me. Because now I should tell you up front before I forget to say it, that I didn't own very much stuff. So I was having to pawn stuff that didn't belong to me. And that adds a little heat to the equation. But, we drunks make some brilliant plans. We'll make a plan, that you could write it down and show it to somebody over at Pepperdine over here, and they look it over and go, that's a pretty solid plan, and my plans worked right up till they quit working, and the plan with the pawn shops was that you had 90 days to get everything back. And the thing I loved about pawn shops is there was no shame. There was no, I don't ever remember walking in a pawn shop and them going, good God, man, what are you going to do with this money, or weren't you just in here this morning or something like that? It was just give them the shotgun and they give you the money, and you give them the deer rifle and they give you the money. And I had 90 days to get everything out, and I could usually pull some kind of a scam or a deal or something during that 90 days to get it and keep that ball rolling. And like so many of my plans, it worked right up until it quit working. And one night I did a deal one time that netted enough money to get everything out of the pawn shops. And But I stopped by the Spillway Pub there in Northeast Dallas. I'm just going to settle my tab. I'm not going to trigger the phenomenon of craving or anything, I'm just going to go in and settle my tab. But I got a lot of ground to cover because I got to go to all these pawn shops. And I came out of a 5-day blackout. I didn't have many of those. I had a lot of those overnight blackouts where you're not sure what happened or where you were or where the car is and that sort of thing. But this was 5 days of I don't remember nothing. And there's some funny stories that came out of that one, but most of them involve outside issues. One little short one. This guy called me up after that, and he goes, "Hey, I got some more of that Chinese outside issue." And I said, "I've never done any Chinese stuff." And he goes, "Oh, dude, you've done a lot of Chinese stuff." And I was like, God didn't remember it, but I come out of this blackout, and I had $8. I'm sitting on the edge of the bed at my mother's house, and I'll never forget it. I can tell you where I was sitting, which way I was facing, the temperature of the room. Because when I came out of that, I woke up and I had $8 in this pocket, and in this pocket I still had all those pawn tickets. I hadn't gotten a darn thing out of the pawn shop. And it was one of those mornings where you just go, oh no. Because I shot my wad on that deal I just did, and now I got nothing. And my dad was a good man. My dad worked hard for his stuff. There wasn't anybody giving him his stuff, and I'm out there pawning. And I wasn't a sociopath. I knew that was some bad BS, and I couldn't just let his deer rifle go to the pawnbroker for $40 or whatever it was. So I'd have to go to my father and say, "Dad, listen, if we act now, I can get you a pretty good deal on all your stuff, but if we wait till tomorrow, it's strictly retail, and the reason, I almost have to tell that. I should also tell you that I'm a big guy, ride Harleys, I'm a competitive shotgun shooter, I did a lot of other stuff. I'm liable to cry like a little girl in a pink dress up here at just about any moment. And one of the times is when I remember the desperation of those mornings, but I almost have to tell that like it's a joke because because what would happen next was that Dallas is a big spread out town like LA is. And it wasn't just we're going to go to the pawn shop. It's like we got to go over on Buckner Boulevard and get your deer rifle and your shotguns out on Beltline Road. And the metal detectors are out in Oak Cliff and your coin collection's in Garland. And we got to go, to Harry Hines to pick up, the sterling silver. And so it was all day in the car with me and my dad and all that shame. And when we'd be riding around, I'd be going, "Dad, I swear to God, I will never do this again." And if I was lying to that man, I damn sure didn't know it, because it felt like I meant it with every fiber of my being that I will never do this again. What I didn't know, riding in the truck with my dad that day, is that I didn't have the power to make good on that promise. When I was promising him that I was never going to do that again, I might as well have promised him that I was going to flap my arms up here and fly around the room, because I did not have the power to never do that again. Within 24, 48, 72 hours, I'd hit the back door of my dad's house like a cat burglar, and it would just be like coming in there and just going, that, and then off we go. And my father and I made the rounds of the pawn shop 3 times before I found my way to you people. That's how cool I was. That's how slick I was, is that I couldn't keep anything together, and I was a burden to anybody that was unfortunate enough to love or care about me. That's what I brought to you people. And about that time, I'd moved to Austin to go to school, and really completely driven by a student loan. I saw a piece of paper that said student loans reactivated, and I applied, and I got the money, and next thing you know, I'm a college student, because it was go to work, student loan, take it. And so I'm down in Austin, and I started getting in a lot of trouble. But by this time I'm starting to pick up charges, and it's starting to look sloppy on paper, and I'm picking up charges while I've got pending charges and that sort of thing. And I picked up a forgery case and a 100-mile-an-hour DWI, but there was this maintenance guy in my apartments that would, well, I should say in my apartments. There was some people who let me lay up in their apartment, and this guy kept coming in talking about treatment. The maintenance guy in these apartments, we'd be in there taking bong hits, getting ready for school, and like any good college student, and he kept talking about treatment. I don't know why he thought we wanted to hear anything about it. He never talked about detox. He never talked about AA. He just talked about treatment. And I'll never forget. At one point, he said, "You might want to go pull a really good drunk before you go to treatment because they're going to make you not want to drink anymore." And I remember thinking, I'm on it, And that really good drunk took 9 months. For 9 months, I was fixing to go to treatment. That's a Texas term. I don't know if they say fixing out here, but it doesn't mean repairing. It means preparing. I was about to go to treatment for 9 months, and that whole time, next week is a good time to go to treatment. And sometimes when things were really bad, by God, I'm going to go tomorrow. Probably tomorrow afternoon, but when tomorrow would get here, it was always today, and today was never the day, until that day when I couldn't go another day. And so I wound up checking myself into that treatment center he talked about. And I've got to move pretty fast because I've had two very distinct experiences in AA. And I had my biggest spiritual awakening when I'd been sober 17 years. And what happened in that first pass through the steps, I got a sponsor who I'll love till the day he dies. This guy was a huge part of my life, and he taught me a lot about character and discipline and foreign concepts like honesty and doing what you said you were going to do, if for no other reason than because you said you were going to do it. Is that kind of twisted? He made me buy a pickup truck one time from a guy because I told the guy I was going to buy it. I found a better deal. But he's like, "Did you tell the guy you were going to come buy the truck?" And I was like, you can see it coming already, And I'm like, technically, yes, And he's like, "Well, then go buy the truck." I drove that truck with a resentment for a year and a half. But he wasn't a real step technician, In fact, I like to say that, and we thought we were. We thought we were into the Big Book. My home group was a Tuesday night Big Book study meeting. I went to 3 Joe and Charlie Big Book studies, but I missed an awful lot. Mark Houston used to like to say, "How do you know what you don't know?" And I missed a lot of stuff in those first pass through the steps. And I like to, but I'm a firm believer in sponsorship, and I always say, don't wait till you're perfect to do it, because it's my firm belief that if the sponsor and the sponsee are both giving it their best shot, God takes up a lot of slack in that deal, and both people were, moved towards the solution. But we went through the steps, but the way we went through it was, "Are you alcoholic?" And I said, "Yes." Clearly I must be. If there is such a thing as an alcoholic, I must be one. I didn't know anybody that drank more than I did, so, I'd been walking around saying I was alcoholic for a long time. Didn't really know what it meant, and we're going to talk about that some in the morning, but maybe. We'll get back to that. But and then, do you believe in this power? I had a little struggle with the power, and we had to talk about that a little bit because I'd had a lot of problems growing up in church and that sort of thing. I punched my dad. The book talks about some of us who were violently anti-religious. I punched my father in the nose one Sunday morning over whether or not I was going to go to Sunday school that morning. I think that qualifies as violently anti-religious, and my dad was about Bill's size, it was a really ugly Sunday morning for me, but I didn't go to Sunday school and didn't for a long time after that. But, do you believe in this power? And then we went right from, if you said, yeah, maybe, we went right from that to then let's get on our knees and do the third step prayer and get you writing inventory. And I wrote inventory, and if you do that, and this is definitely what I like to talk about in a workshop. I love workshop environments because you really get a chance to go through what my second experience was with the steps. But I think what happens with a lot of us is we go right from "Are you willing to believe?" to the third step prayer. And if I do that, I skip this body of work that takes place in pages 60, 61, 62, and 63. And it's really not very important. We'll talk about it tomorrow. It's just the root of my problem and the basis of my recovery for the rest of my life. Other than that, skip it. But so I wound up, I did that, and I'm writing the inventory, and so, see if this sounds a little selfish. My take on the steps then was that I'm alcoholic and that's a problem. Can God help me? I hope so. Okay, so let's do the third step prayer, and then we're going to write inventory. I'm going to talk about all the bad stuff that I've ever done, because then I won't feel as bad and I won't have to drink. And then I'll do a fifth step with somebody, and it's just going to be it was like a big confession, kind of. And then I'll feel better. And then 6 and 7... you just kind of phone those in. And then 8 and 9, go out and make amends so that I won't run into anybody that makes me feel bad, or I won't feel bad about, and then 10 and 11, I knew to apologize if I really screwed up, and I would do some, but the bulk of my meditation was kind of keeping the 24-hour day book on the back of the toilet, and reading it and go, might as well go, okay, God, see you tomorrow, and then I was carrying that message, to people, but I was very much about staying sober. I was very much an AA member. I was a fellowship making fool. I mean, I'm going to meetings all the time, and I'm dating AA girls, and had AA roommates, and going to AA barbecues and AA dances and that sort of thing. And I talk a lot about untreated alcoholism, and I hit a bottom at 4.5 years sober, and I hit a bottom, I blew up a marriage, had a child support check going out, and all these are things that are against my values. I didn't get married to get divorced, and I really wanted to raise that little girl, and things are starting to get ugly in sobriety. And then I waited the appropriate amount of time to get into another relationship. 14 days. And so 2.5 years later, I've blown up another marriage and I got another child support check going on. And what happened for me, and by this time I got some things going on, and this is not a period of my life that I would have wanted videotaped and sent into the General Service Office on how a 7-year member of Alcoholics Anonymous would behave. But I was getting weary of the process, and I'm thinking, screw this. I've tried it your way. And I'm getting knocked to the mat every time I step in the ring. And I started kind of letting a little dishonesty creep in. I started thinking, half measures of ale is nothing. I'm going to get mine, and I'm going to, so it's nothing serious. It was just like a little wire fraud, a little income tax evasion, a little insurance, and just the stuff that everybody does, and I loved it. My wife was sponsoring this lady that had a head-on collision. She was taking pills, and she called her up, and she was just as loaded as she can be. And my wife let me hear the message, and the lady was like, Katie, this is, and Katie called that girl's sponsor, and I'll never forget the lady. This story has nothing to do with anything, by the way. And she was telling her about it. She goes, she was loaded, and the woman goes, well, now we've all had our problems with pills. And you're like, no, we haven't. But not for nothing. That has nothing to do with anything. But I thought of it when I said things everybody does. But what happened was, I met this woman that lived in New York City, and I got into a relationship that, let's just say, it was a little dishonest. And the most dishonest thing about it was me. She made a lot of money. Katie was my best friend for 20 years. Katie, I was at her wedding. We were like brother and sister for over 20 years until her husband passed away, and we've been a couple for 10 years. But during all this time, I mean, we were really like brother and sister. No flirtation, no innuendo, none of that stuff. Just buddies. And oh my God, she hated every relationship I was ever in. I mean, but she really didn't like this one. And at one point, I remember her saying, "Charlie, if this woman lives in Austin, I don't think you're dating her. And if she lived in Austin and made $30,000 a year, I guarantee you're not dating her." And I remember thinking, well, she doesn't live in Austin, and she makes just one hell of a lot more than $30,000 a year. So what's your point, you know? And I'm in this dishonest relationship, but I mean, I'm kind of like I'm rocking along, and I'm very much about staying sober. And I mean, the idea of getting loaded horrifies me. I've had surgeries without anything. I had a liver biopsy with nothing but local. It freaked the doctor out. He was like, when he ran that thing in me, he goes, it's like a meat thermometer, and he ran it in the thing, and he goes, "You mind if I ask what that felt like?" And I was like, it was a lot like being stabbed, you know, but I was very much about being sober, and I'm going to the meetings, and I mean, let's just say there weren't a whole ton of people running up to me after the meeting saying, you know, "Could I get your phone number?" or "Would you take me through the work?" But I'm rocking along, and and I would go up there, and I'd think, you know what, I'm going to get out of this marriage. I think I'm going to tell her this weekend when I get up there. But then you get up there and it's Thursday, you know, and there's no use, blowing it on Thursday. I mean, and then, I'll wait till, and then the next thing you know, you go, it's Saturday, I'm going home tomorrow, you know, and this, does it sound a little dishonest? You know, I mean, this went on for, a total of 12 years. And 8 years into the marriage, 4 years dating and 8 years into the marriage. And, there's a lot of stuff going on. Well, we had a beach house out in the Hamptons that I had a key role in building, and one time we were out there for the weekend, and I had company up from South Carolina, and I decided we'd show these people Long Island from the air, and we're going to charter a plane, and we're going to fly from East Hampton Airport into LaGuardia and have a car pick us up and go to dinner. And we're flying along, we take off, and we're flying along, and Long Island forks out by the Hamptons. The South Fork is the Hamptons, the North Fork, and in the middle is this Peconic Bay. And we're flying over that. We're just passing Shelter Island, and I'm in the co-pilot seat. It's a little 6-seater Cessna 210 with retractable landing gear, and we're flying along, and and I'm in the co-pilot seat, and I put on the little headphones, and let me tell you what you don't want to hear your charter pilot saying when you put the headphones on is, "Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on," you know, and I'm going, and I'm looking at him, and they said, "You're cleared to Gobretsky." And I look, and there's a runway at 10 o'clock, and we're not going to make it. We're not going to make land. We're not going to clear the trees. We're damn sure not going to make that runway. And he says, "You don't understand. I've lost engine power. I can't make land. I'm going to have to ditch." And I remember thinking, what? I mean, I'm a gambler my whole life. I knew people that flew to the Hamptons every weekend for 20 years. And the first time I charter a plane, we're going to set it down at night in the drink. And what are the odds of that? You know, and he says, "Brace for impact." I'll never forget that. He says, he turns kind of towards shore, and he says, "Brace for impact." Anybody know how to do that? You know, and we come in, and boosh, we hit the water, and I mean, it's just like Six Flags splashdown times 1,000. There's water and spray and white and glass and noise, and then absolute silence. And all of a sudden I'm going, holy mackerel, I think we're okay. And I felt something on my knee. Now, this wasn't much of an airplane. Really crappy boat. I mean, about the time I'm thinking, my God, I think we survived that landing. All of a sudden I feel something that goes, boom, and I can't get the door open. And I realize I got to get some air. And I go up to get some air, and there's nothing but water in the roof of that plane. And I remember thinking, so that's it. That's it. I die today in this blankety blank airplane. And I went back down, and the door came open. And I'd like to tell you that my first thought was of pulling my wife out, or my dog, or the two people in the back. When I felt my feet come free, my first thought was, I'm out. I'm out. And I went up and I got some air, and I came back down and I pulled my wife out. And I went back down and I got the dog out, and the other people went out the other side. And we were on CNN with Anderson Cooper, live from the headlines with Anderson Cooper and all this stuff. And the reason I tell this story is because we survived. Spoiler alert, I survived. But not by much. I came damn close to drowning. The reason I say that is because an event like that will make you start looking at things differently. I started looking at what was going on in my life. Because I like to say that I was part of God's catch and release program. I was at Crested Butte AA conference a couple of years ago, and I caught this big trout, giant trout, and then we look at it, we take a couple pictures, and we put it back in the water. And I always picture that trout going back down to his little trout buddies, going, "I saw the sun," I was in the boat, I can't help but think God's got a bigger plan for me, I think I'm supposed to help other fishes, But what happened is, as I come back to Austin, and I'd started noticing some holes in my program. I'd started noticing how it took a keen eye, but and I used to feel guilty about telling that story, because it feels like I ought to get up here and tell you how I've been a shining example of AA principles since the day that I came in. And I used to feel bad about not being that guy till I found out I had so much company. There's a lot of us that aren't quite nailing it, and what happened was, but I called up John Henry, this old timer in Austin, and I said, "John Henry, man," I said, "I'm so self-centered. I can't even be in a conversation with anybody. I have to just force myself to go, 'Hey, Zach, how are the kids?' and act like I give a flip about the answer, because I don't. All I care about is me and me and me. And it was all over me. I didn't realize it was mentioned in our book, but the level of self-centeredness that I carried around as a 15-year sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous was unbelievable. I remember one time walking into the big AA club there in Austin. We had this card room, and we call it the half measures room. And we guys would play rummy in there, And I walk in there one day, and this guy that I've known for a long time, he goes, "Hey, Charlie, what's up?" And I go, "Hey," he goes, "We need to go back out to Vegas sometime." And I go, yeah, we do. And I turn around and I am horrified, because I got zero memory of ever being in Vegas with this guy. And I'm 15 years sober, and I start thinking about it. And I'm thinking about it, and I remember there was a trip to Vegas where 4 guys went out there, a bunch of AA guys, and we played golf and gambled and got massages and knocked around, and all that. But the reason I didn't remember being in Vegas with this guy is because I wasn't in Vegas with this guy. I was in Vegas with me. And this guy just happened to be along for the ride. I'm sure I'm the only one that's that self-centered. It probably doesn't happen in California, but it's rampant in Texas, and that's the level of self-centeredness I carry. I guarantee you that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow, because that's all I'm about. My poor sponsees now must just be going, "Oh no, I got a sponsor that's only read 3 pages out of the big book, because and I'm not even going to tell you which 3 they are. We'll talk about it tomorrow. But, what happened was I started getting into this work, and John Henry, I'll never forget it, he goes, meet me tomorrow, we'll go down to the ranch, it's a treatment center, he goes, and we'll go talk to the winos. And service work doesn't sound like a good idea, I mean, especially when I'm that self-obsessed, I'm like, no, I was kind of hoping we'd meet somewhere and talk about the depth of my problems, and I started working with these guys, and I'm the 15, 16 year guy, so they're asking me to sponsor them, and there were times where I could talk to you about life coach stuff, and because I'd made so many brilliant choices in my life, but as far as taking a newcomer through the steps, it had been a while, and there were times when I'd just be like, go read the doctor's opinion and Bill's story, and I'd go read the doctor's opinion and Bill's story. There were times where I felt like I was a step ahead of this guy, but I fell in with a crew of guys. One of my buddies had gone to treatment down at La Hacienda and hooked up with a bunch of big book people down there, and our conversation started being about, what do you do when they say this? What do you about when they say that? And about that time, so I'm starting to take an interest in the big book and how to have answers that are coming out of the book. And I started really getting excited about those conversations. And I'm seeing stuff that I'd never seen before. I'm seeing stuff in the book where I'm going, surely that's only in the 4th edition, right? I mean, I've never seen that, and that still happens to me. But I started doing this work, and about that time, a guy called me, and he goes, "Hey, I heard something about a big book study up in Dallas." Now we're in Austin, and I go, I'll check. And I called a couple of my guys up in Dallas, and they sent me this flyer, and it said Mark H. and this other guy are doing a big book weekend, and I'm like, I told Katie, I said, I don't think this is what Dick was looking for, but this guy is Chris's sponsor, and I like Chris. I've been listening to Chris a little bit, and so we wound up going, and my wife is like, what? We wouldn't have been that excited about a big book meeting, much less a weekend, oh boy, let's talk about the big book, and cause she was 17 years sober at the time. And we go up there and I meet this guy named Mark Houston, and I can almost never say his name without weeping because of, the power of God spoke to me through this guy, Mark Houston. And, oh my God, we're sitting in this study, and there were times he's coming out, he's saying stuff, and I remember at one point leaning over to my wife and going, what book is this guy reading from? I have never heard any of the stuff he's talking about, and it just blew me away. And he wound up moving to Austin, and he became my sponsor and sponsored me from then until he died suddenly 3 years ago. And but I tell you, in the time we worked together, my whole life changed. And I found out there was a group of people working this program at a level that I'd never experienced. They were really into doing the work, at a high level, and meeting regularly and talking about, this program, and having spiritual consent with each other, and having brothers that loved me enough to call me on stuff, whether it was going to hurt my feelings or not. And that was an established relationship where we said, I'm giving you permission to call me on anything you see me doing, whether it hurts my feelings or not, and because otherwise we get into what we call these unsigned death pacts with each other, where it's like, look, you don't call me on my deal, I won't call you on your stuff, nod your head if you understand, and we move forward like that. Well, this was, and it was all done under the path of consideration and with love and concern for each other. We weren't just breaking each other's chops all the time, but it would say stuff like, is it possible that, or I'd like to offer for your consideration that maybe, because otherwise you're going to hear my ego defending itself and telling you why you got the story wrong. And if you let me tell the story, I'll never forget the first time. I'm all over the place, but I'll be done here in a minute. At that workshop, at one point, Mark brings this guy up, and I think his name was Paul. And Paul come up here, and he's this little guy that Mark had been kind of picking on the whole weekend, and in a kind of way. And he gets him up there, and he goes, Paul, let me ask you something. He goes, this is just an example of the kind of work Mark did. He had a lot of clarity, and he was very direct. And he gets this guy, he goes, Paul, do you meditate? And Paul goes, well, I'm a truck driver, see, and a lot of times when I'm driving the truck, I'll meditate, And Mark goes, I'll never forget it. Mark goes, okay, Paul, two things. He goes, first of all, when you're driving the truck, we very much want you to be about driving the truck. We really don't need you hurtling down the road in a tractor trailer rig meditating. And he goes, second of all, in the future, when I ask you a yes or no question, man, I love that guy. He says, in the future, when I ask you a yes or no question, I'm going to expect a yes or no response. So I'm going to ask you again if you meditate, and it's very important to me for you to say no. And I remember sitting there going, whoa! Man, am I glad he didn't call me up there. Because Mark used to say you can ask an alcoholic if they're married and you get a 5-minute answer. It's like that was a yes or no question. But we started doing this work at a whole nother level, and I started having a meeting at my house on Thursday nights, and it was Mark and me and all my sponsees. And it's the best AA I've ever been involved in. We're meeting every week, and we're talking about the amends process and writing amends cards and going out and making all of our amends. And some of mine were 25 years old or 20 years old, and that's the stuff I want to talk about this weekend. But it just turned out that there was a level of the game going on I didn't even know about. I'm an NFL football fan. I assume we're all Dallas Cowboy fans here. I've been I love saying that. I said that in Philadelphia the other day, and I was like, so much for the city of brotherly love. But I've been a Cowboy fan since they were good, and I'm sponsoring this guy one time. And he says, my family's got a skybox at Texas Stadium. And I'm like, yeah, good for you. A few months later, he calls me up one day and he goes, hey man, you want to go to see the Eagles game Monday night and sit in our skybox? And I said, yes, I do. And I go to his grandfather's house, and we get in the car and we go down to Texas Stadium. Now I've had season tickets before, and stuff. We go to a special little parking lot. We go in through a special little gate. We go up a quiet little escalator into this little quiet hallway. And we go down to this skybox, and the field is right there. And there's little waiters bringing in cookies and ice. And I'm looking around. I don't know whether to be excited about being in this skybox or to be pissed off about having sat in the cheap seats for 20 years. But that was exactly my experience with Alcoholics Anonymous. If I almost missed it, if I had died in that car wreck, in that plane crash, if you'd have come to me when I had 17 years of sobriety and said, Charlie, what is going to change your life and set you on fire is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous coming right out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I would have told you you're crazy, man, because I've been in AA for 17 years. I know what AA has to offer me, and I had never stuck a toe in the water. Just like those football games, it turned out there was people doing this deal at a level that I had never experienced before. I have just been on fire with AA for the last 10 years, and a little over. And I live in an AA household. My wife is a very active AA member. She sponsors a ton of people. She's the best at hearing inventory of anybody I've ever seen. And we're going to talk about that some when we talk about the inventory process, because there was a time when that wouldn't have made any sense to me. How could one person be better at hearing inventory than it's like saying that somebody's really good at listening to a CD or something, but now it makes a lot of sense to me. And that's the kind of stuff we talk about. I am so grateful to have gotten, first of all, that I didn't die in that plane crash 10 years ago, but the level of life that I've been experiencing since then is so far and away beyond anything that I'd ever experienced. I can't even tell you about it. I get emotional when I see the clear and obvious hand of God moving in my life. And looking back on one time, Mark, we were talking to Mark one day, and he goes, "Do you really think you had anything to do with being at that Big Book workshop that weekend?" Looking back on it, I can see where God just moved us into a direction of being right where He wanted us to be, where we could be of maximum service. There's a quote on page 100 that I like to close with. It says, "Both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. If you persist, remarkable things will happen. When we look back, we realize that the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned." I had been reading this and closing talks with it for a long time before I ever saw that line that says, "when we look back." Because, God's will, am I the only one that God's will looks like it's going to be kind of a ripoff? It looks like a jip on the front end. Really mailed that much money to the IRS, or something. But it says when we look back, we see that the things that came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. Because I can't see it on the front end. Excuse me. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. I'm really looking forward to this weekend. I love AA, I love drunks, and I love talking about this stuff. I thank God for bringing me back to AA, and I thank AA for bringing me back to my relationship with God. Thanks for listening to me, guys. Was that Joe was quite a seeker, and he'd been all over. He'd been at the ashrams and sat at the feet of the Dalai Lama and studied Eastern religion, Western religion, you name it. And then he came to Don and he said, "Will you sponsor me?" And Don said, "Well, look, I'll sponsor you, but if I'm going to sponsor you, we're going to be coming out of the Big Book. So you're going to have to put all that other crap aside, and we're going to come out of the Big Book." And out of that, he always gave Don credit for writing the set-aside prayer, but Don said, "I didn't write it. Joe wrote it based on that conversation." But it's a prayer that basically goes something like, "God, please help me to set aside everything I think I know about myself, alcoholism, AA, the Big Book, and even you, God. Help me to have an open mind so that I can have a new experience." Words to that effect. And I work with that a lot with my guys and with myself. I try to read 2 pages a day out of the Big Book. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten up in the morning, done the set-aside prayer. This probably doesn't happen to you guys, but I tend to read the book and I'm not necessarily looking for new information. Especially if I've been reading it a long time. I'm looking for ways that I'm already right. I got a bad habit of reading, and so I don't know I'm missing stuff. When we say, how do you know what you don't know? That'll give you a brain cramp if you think about it. But if I'm not careful, what I think I know can stand in the way of the truth. And it happens way into sobriety, because what happens is I'm reading the book and I'm reading along and I go, oh yeah, this is that part where it says that. Oh yeah, I know this. Yeah, oh, there's that jaywalker, whatever. But I get to pieces and I go, oh, you can't tell me anything about this piece. I've already got it highlighted and underlined, in the book. And it's amazing how many times I'll do the set-aside prayer and a brand new piece of information will come up off the page. And so I like working with it because I don't know. I mean, otherwise, I'm just looking for, we call it a confirmation bias, where I'm just really kind of looking for confirmation of ways that I'm already right. And I'm not picking up a whole lot of new information that way. And a lot of things happen when you start coming at somebody with something that differs from what their current belief system is, or God forbid you come at me with something that differs from what my beloved sponsor told me. The ego goes into self-defense mode, and now it's literally about the life and death of the ego. It's not about the little issue anymore. It's the ego fighting for its life. So that's why we use the path of consideration and spiritual consent, and phrases like "Is it possible that?" or "I'd like to offer for your consideration that maybe," because if it's just ways to try to get information around the ego without it going into self-defense. Because not right now. I talked about being a recovered alcoholic, and I didn't hear that for a long time. And I don't usually say that in a regular talk, because one of the things I worry about is alienating the exact guys. It's one thing to preach to the choir, but I don't want to shut down the exact guys I'm talking to, because I've been that guy. I was the guy that was like, "Oh, he's one of those," and I'm done. I'm not trying to hear anything else. But if we're going to talk about recovery, I don't know. It's funny. I was talking to Bill one day, and I was saying how the funny thing in AA is that when we form a firing squad, we always form a circle. And so we wind up with some of our best members that are out there in the trenches, slugging away, all about saving drunks, but we're fighting over recovering, or sponsee, protege, or little things like that. But if we're going to talk about being recovered, because you could argue it both ways, but if we're going to talk about what are we talking about having recovered from, and in the forward, there on that title page it said that. In the forward to the first edition, it says, "We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book." They thought they had discovered something big enough that it was worth putting in book form, so it didn't get all scattered out like that telephone game where you start a little saying off here, and by the time it gets to the back of the room, it's not anything like what we're talking about. I do love that line where it says, "To show others precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book." They felt they had found something. What really made AA a big deal when it hit the ground was an understanding of three things. It was an understanding of the problem with alcoholism, a solution for that problem, and then a program of action that would bring about that solution. And the book is full of stories where people had 2 out of 3 of those things, but it was those 3 things coming together. And I always compare it to, like, if we were to go out to the car after the meeting, and let's say I don't know anything about cars, and I go out there and I stick my key in the car and nothing happens. Well, now I'm stuck, right? I don't even know what the problem is, and then, so I'm sitting there and I'm not going, and then let's say Bruce comes up and goes, "Oh, man, you left your headlights on. Your headlights have been on all night. You've run the battery down. That's what your problem is. You got a dead battery." I'm like, okay, now I understand the problem. The problem is I got a dead battery. Am I going anywhere? No, because I don't know what to do about it, And he goes, "Well, you got to get some juice in that battery, because it turns the starter and the starter fires, I go, "Oh, okay, now I know the solution. I got to get some juice in that battery." Still stuck, Bill comes up and goes, "Raise your hood. I got jumper cables in my car. I'm going to pull over here next to it. We're going to put black on black. We're going to put red on red. I'm going to rev the engine. When I give you the signal, turn the key." Now I got a program of action that'll bring about the solution to my problem. But if we're not careful, I think we can diminish the problem. And the book, I think sometimes we have a tendency, we talk about qualifying the new guy, and I do like I don't think I need to stand guard at the door of the AA, and make sure that we're not being infiltrated by filthy dope fiends or stuff like that. But I do think it's important to find out if this guy's one of us, and if he's in the right room. And if he's not in the right room, try to find a fellowship that he's going to identify in as much as I identify in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because, and you always hear people saying, well, it's really just one solution and that sort of thing. But if you carry it through to the 12th step, when that guy's been around a minute and somebody comes up to him and says, will you sponsor me? They're not going to have that identification that takes place. And I really believe what the book says about how important that, because when that identification takes place, I'm willing to take action that I don't even have to understand yet. And we'll get back to that. Maybe. But, so if we're talking about having recovered, what are we talking about having recovered from? It says we have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And, you hear, when I was talking about disregarding the problem, I think sometimes we assume that when a guy gets in, my first job when I sit down with a new guy is to give him what I call a fatal dose of alcoholism. I think we tend to think, nobody gets to AA by mistake, or I've heard there was a treatment center at home that would say, you work the first step getting here. Anybody heard that one? Yeah, well, it wasn't my experience, and it wasn't Dr. Bob's experience, and it wasn't Fred's experience, and it wasn't. There's a lot of examples in the book, and like with Dr. Bob, it said he'd been banging around Oxford for a couple of years, and it says that he suspected a spiritual remedy might help him with his problem, so he knew the solution, and he had a program of action, but he didn't understand the problem. It wasn't until, it says, when the broker explained alcoholism to him the way Silkworth explained it to him, he went after the spiritual remedy with a energy, I'm paraphrasing now, energy he'd never been able to put forward before, and he sobered never to drink again for the rest of his life. That's how important the explanation of the problem was to Bob. And we'll talk more about where they understood the problem and the solution but didn't have a program of action. But, I think when it talks about being one of our members properly armed with the facts about himself, and some of the stuff we're going to talk about is stuff that really helps me in my own experience. Sometimes it helps in taking new guys through the work. Because, like I said, there was a time when I felt a little awkward about taking a brand new guy through the work after I'd been around for a while. There was a time when I call it slogan slinging, where if you'd have come at me, I'd have been like, okay, put the plug in the jug. That's a good one. And do 90 meetings in 90 days. Don't drink no matter what. And take this book. Take this book and read. Just read the whole damn thing. And there was parts of me that kind of hoped the guy didn't really call back. Because I hoped he found some solution, but in my heart I knew I didn't have it for him. I hope all the stuff we're going to talk about today is redundant for everybody, but my experience was that when it talks about being an ex-problem drinker who's found our solution, who's properly armed with the facts about himself, what does it mean to be armed with the facts about myself? And I like to talk about what it means to be an alcoholic, because I spent a good deal of time sitting in AA meetings, raising my hand saying, I'm Charlie Parker, I'm an alcoholic, and I didn't know what it meant. So if we're talking about having recovered, what are we talking about having recovered from? And I always say that I only have two problems. As an alcoholic, I only have two struggles with alcohol. One happens to me when I drink it, and the other one happens to me when I don't drink it. Other than that, I really don't have any struggles with alcohol. Just gives me trouble when I'm drinking it or when I'm not drinking it. But the first piece of it is this physical piece of alcoholism. And the doctor's opinion talks a lot about it, that I have an abnormal reaction to drinking. It says that it's on Roman numeral 28. It's funny. I was talking about primary purpose group, and we study the book. Now, we're not just studying the book to have a ready answer in a discussion meeting or something. We're trying to get clarity on the message that they laid out in the book. what are they talking about and in what order? You know, why are they laying this? Why are we talking about Fred and why are we talking about him now? You know, if they were able to put this whole solution in such a small, I mean, we could sit down and write, 200 pages on step one, and they put the whole deal, in the first 164 pages of the book, and the bulk of it really in the first 103 pages. If they were able to be that concise with it, what information did they find important to put forward, and in what order? And that's what we're studying. We don't read a page and talk about our experience with it. We talk about what were the founders what information were they trying to put forth in that page. And we were talking about the doctor's opinion because we're back at the front of the book. It's funny. I mean, somebody said one time, they go, "What are you going to do about your meeting? I mean, it's standing room only." There were people around the walls, and I was like, "Oh, don't worry. When we get into wives and to employer, and and then when we get back to the front, the room starts filling up again." But we're back in the doctor's opinion. One of the things I never really thought about is I use the doctor's opinion a lot. I was talking to somebody else that was talking about, really pounding the doctor's opinion this morning. And I had always given Dr. Silkworth credit for endorsing our book. I mean, these drunks had written this book, and we need some street cred, or we need some really legitimate cred, so they go to this doctor. And I'd always given them credit, but really, I'd never really thought about how much I use the doctor's opinion when I'm working with a new guy. And it kind of came to me the other day that, they'd already written a book when they handed it to Silkworth, and he didn't just endorse our book. He added a great deal to it. I mean, there's a lot of really powerful information in the doctor's opinion. And one of the pages I work with a ton is Roman numeral 28, XXVIII. I use this page in every conversation with a new guy, or sometimes it's I was in Bermuda last week, and I met a guy that was at this Thanksgiving dinner, and I said, "How long are you sober?" And he goes, 13 months. And I said, "Where are you at in the step work?" We're just talking, and he goes, "Well, I'm still kind of on step 4. And in my mind, I'm thinking, probably not, because I'm about getting through this work pretty rapidly, and I spent 4 hours with the guy the next morning down by the water, and now he's on step 4, and my favorite thing to hear when you're working with a guy like that is to have a guy that's been around a while, because he had 6 years another time, and he goes, "I've never heard the stuff you're talking about." To me, that's the best thing there is to hear, is to have a guy that, go, "I've been in and out of AA for X number of time, and I've never heard any of this stuff," so a lot of times I'll recap, even if it's a guy that's been around for a while, we'll recap these first steps, and sometimes I'll say, "Well, teach it to me, why don't you tell me what step 1 means? What does it mean to be an alcoholic?" Because one guy was ready to do his third step and write inventory, and I said, "Tell me about step 1. What does it mean?" And he goes, "That I'm alcoholic and I can't manage my own life." He was proud of himself, and I said, "Well, what does that mean to you?" And he's like, "It means that I can't go through one day without drinking." I said, "Okay, so if I can go through a day without drinking, I'm not alcoholic?" And he's like, "Oh, darn it," So we had to have a conversation about what it means to be an alcoholic. And Silkworth, it was a big deal because, it doesn't take too many times to tell my dad I'll never do this again and show him back up and do it again, for me to think that there's something wrong with me. When I showed up here, I'm thinking, disease my ass. There is something bad wrong with me, because I keep saying I'm not going to do it anymore, and I do it. So for a long time, they thought it was a moral issue or an issue of control and that sort of thing. So, but when we talk about what it means to be an alcoholic, one of the big things that Silkworth brought to the table was right here on Roman numeral 28. He says, "We believe," and so suggested a few years ago. He had written a paper about 4 years earlier putting these points forward. He says that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy. I like to break these pages down when I'm talking to guys and stuff, and it says, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. I am so capable of reading a line like that and just have it go, whoosh, and breaking it down. It says that we believe that the action of alcohol on who? On these chronic alcoholics. Right? We're not talking about candy-ass little disco drunks here. What we call 2 beers and oh dear. It's we're talking about chronic alcoholics, guys that have been running it for a while. And it says that the action of these guys is the manifestation of an allergy. Well, allergy was a new term in the early 1900s. But for our purposes, we're just going to say that it means an abnormal physical reaction. Something happens to me when I drink that ain't regular. It doesn't happen to my sister. My sister's not alcoholic. And, when she drinks, it doesn't trigger this allergy with her. So if like we said, all we're going to say an allergy means is an abnormal physical reaction, right? Let's say I had an abnormal, and it says the manifestation of an allergy. All manifestation means is the way something shows up, the way something presents itself. And let's say this whole front row here was just over at breakfast, and they had a big basket of strawberries, and we all sat there and ate strawberries. Except we come over here and I start going, and all of a sudden my throat starts kind of swelling shut, and my eyes are swelling shut, and everybody else is fine, but I got an abnormal physical reaction to strawberries, and the way it manifests is in that swelling shut. And how does my allergy to alcohol manifest? What happens when I drink alcohol? And it calls it this phenomenon of craving. Well, phenomenon just means something that we know happens, but we don't really know why it happens. We've seen it happen enough to know that it happens, but we don't really know why it happens. And what is this? What happens when I drink? It calls it craving. It says, when I drink, for me, it triggers a craving that is beyond my control. Right? When I start drinking, it triggers a craving for more booze. So when I take the first drink, it triggers a craving for the second drink. This is the physical piece of alcoholism. And by the time I get to the 5th drink, it sounds like a better idea than the second one did. And I don't really need to read this book, or it doesn't matter what Charlie says. The most important thing you can do with any of the stuff in this book, that a new guy can do with any of this stuff, is lay it up against your own experience and see if it's a fit. See what happens when I drink. But the thing is, the disease is tricky. My mind never tells me, I don't ever remember walking into a Spillway pub there in East Dallas and going, oh, Bobby, God almighty. Spiritual malady is on me today. And I had a beer on the way over here, and it has triggered a phenomenon of craving that is kicking my ass. And the thing about it is, I never thought I'd triggered the phenomenon of craving. I just thought I changed my mind. Right? Where you go, the guys at work go, hey, we're going to go have a couple of drinks after work at the pool hall, and I'm like, would you like to go? And I'm like, yes, I would. And then I get over there and they go, hey, listen, dude, I got to bounce. The old lady's making spaghetti at the house, and I'm the guy that's going, spaghetti, really? No, rock on, dude. I'll change my mind. I'm going to stay here, And I never thought I'd triggered this craving, but if I told you that I was going in to have a couple of drinks, I'd get in there, and it turns out 2 was a bad number. I should have guessed higher. And next thing you know, I'm off on a run. And the book, in the doctor's opinion, in the first 23 pages of the book, does an awful lot talking about this physical allergy to alcohol. And I've even got one of my sponsees made a little graphic about it that is part of that stuff that I sent out. He even put the 2 little fists in there. I swear I see guys on the street in Austin that I've met at the treatment center. They're like, Charlie, what's up? But when we talk about what happens when I drink is the first piece. And it says that it never occurs in the average temperate drinker. And it goes on to say these allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And I have to ask myself, one of the things in my crew is we're big on turning statements into questions out of the big book. We're taking statements that are in the big book and turning them into questions and asking myself, is this my condition? Is this true for me? Do I find myself with these beliefs based on my experience? Is this true for me? And I have to ask myself, are these true? That once having formed the habit, and I'm found I cannot break it, once having lost my self-confidence, the reliance upon things human, my problems pile up on me and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Damn. Nobody shows up for AA on a winning streak. And that thing about problems piling up and becoming astonishingly difficult to solve, God almighty. But this thing about, it says frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. You can't just come at me with, some... That identification that takes place when one drunk is talking to another, one of the best ways to illustrate how important it is when it's not there. I showed up for treatment on December 8th of 83. And I'm a big boy now, but I was about 25 pounds heavier then. And I say that because I was really interested in Christmas dinner. It was Christmas Day, and they had put the whole deal out. It was, turkey and dressing and mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce and giblet gravy and rolls and and I'm just sitting down with my big old Jethro plate, and right as I'm sitting down, the door swings open, and in walks 5 people from one of the local churches. There's some do-gooders from one of the local churches, and they've come to sing Christmas carols to us heathen alcoholics. Right? You can imagine my excitement, right? Because now I don't get to eat, and they're going to sing. And there's one woman, though, I watch her, and she's walking along, and she leans over, and she says something to this guy, and then she says something to this guy, and then she says something to this lady, and when she gets to me, she says, "Are you a patient here?" And I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "I know exactly what you're going through." I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yes. I was once addicted to caffeine." Well, I was like, ain't that a bitch? I'm like, let me ask you a question. Did you ever pawn your mom's sterling silver to get a can of Folgers? I mean, bless your heart, that's what people do. They're trying to identify, but it ain't there, that's that depth and weight we're talking about. And it says in nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves. Well, I want to get rolling so we can get through step 1. But down here at the bottom of that page, it says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Any argument on that one? I mean, I like banana pudding, but I love the effect produced by alcohol. I didn't just burn my world to the ground over something I kind of dig a little bit, But it says the sensation is so elusive that while I admit it's harmful, while I admit it's injurious, after a while I can't differentiate the truth from the false. And one of the ways I can't differentiate the truth from the false is, and I love the way Clancy says, if you gave every one of us a flag to wave when we get here, everybody's flag would say the same thing. It would say, "You don't understand, my case is different. You don't understand, my case is different." Because the feeling I show up here with is, look, I understand you got your little 12-step thing here, but if you understood how complicated and complex a person I am and my background, and you'd really be a little embarrassed to be offering me your little hinky 12-step thing, and so it goes on to say, and one of the ways I can't tell the truth from the false is I think I'm fixing to get a handle on it. I'm the guy sitting in a treatment center thinking I ain't like these other guys. If I ever get as lame as these guys, maybe I'll do your little deal, but I just need to rest up a minute. I know I was in a bad spot. I know it looks bad that I'm sitting in this county-funded detox center, but when I get out of here, I'm going to manage this thing a little better, and I ain't like these guys, and I don't have to do what they do because I ain't like that. When I get out of here, I'm going to manage this thing a little better. I'm not going to drink tequila anymore. I'm not going to drink with those guys. I'm probably going to start studying the Bible or something, but I ain't like this, and I don't have to do that. And that happens in pretty short order. Dr. Harry Tiebout wrote some papers about us where he said the recuperative powers of the alcoholic ego are astounding. And this is a non-alcoholic watching us because, on day one, I'm like, oh, please help me. I'll do anything, and after a couple of weeks, I start going, I don't really like this place. I don't like my counselor. I don't like the program here. Have you seen that Nimrod they gave me for a roommate? And the food, for God's sakes, and this is 10 days after I'll do anything, and it happens over and over and over again. And it says, to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. I love that. Because, I always say, if I went to my sainted 90-year-old mother and said, Mom, I can't come over today. I got to go see my PO and give a UA because I got a DUI. She would have no idea what I'm talking about. Around here we're like, oh man, dude, who's your PO? How much time you got? I can tell you how to beat a UA. And my alcoholic life seems the only normal because of the time, my mother, I told you she was a first grade school teacher. She had a way of moving just this one finger when she would talk to you, and I can remember her going, and it would always start off with, you are such an idiot. You drink every day. And as I'm sitting there, I'm untouched by that because I'm thinking, everybody I know drinks every day. I don't hang with somebody that doesn't drink every day. And what I didn't know to tell her is that if drinking did for you what it does for me, you'd be stupid not to drink every day. Why wouldn't I drink every day? It's the greatest thing I ever, Well, it goes on to say, here's where it gets ugly. It says, if you go to page 23, there's a little piece where it says, I've written in that little space under the first line, I've written, looking at the body stops here. Because on the page before it says, we're equally positive that once he takes alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. And in the doctor's opinion, he describes 5 types of alcoholics. And it doesn't matter, there's a squillion types of us, but it says all these and many other types have one thing in common. They can't start drinking without triggering this phenomenon of craving, this thing that happens when I start drinking. It's a big problem. But over on page 23, it says these observations, what observations? All these observations they've been making about what happens to me when I drink. It says these observations would be academic and pointless. I always say that translates to wouldn't mean squat. No, I'm sorry, number 23. Page 23, when there is a solution. It's up to the doctor's opinion in the first 23 pages talks about this physical reaction to alcohol. And right here on page 23, it shifts, and it's not talking about the body anymore. And it says these observations, it's top of page 23, these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting a terrible cycle in motion. It's a big problem what happens to me when I drink vodka. It triggers this craving. It sends me on a run that I got really no control over. But if my biggest problem was what happens when I drink 4 ounces of vodka, what would my solution be? Don't drink vodka. I'd be like the guy that says, Doc, it hurts when I do this. And the doctor says, well, don't do that. But just think of what a crappy... Is it Mike? Tom? Tom, imagine what a crappy program this would be if we bring Tom in here, and we go, okay, Tom, you got a physical reaction to alcohol that ain't regular. When you drink, it's going to trigger a run that, in the long run, it's going to get away from you, and it's really going to get ugly. And over the long run, it's just going to get worse and worse. Quit it. Just quit it. Well, but it goes into this thing, and this is where the second piece of alcoholism comes in, is what happens when I don't drink. Because I never thought about this for a long time. Every time I ever took that first drink, the drink that triggers another run, or a spree as the big book calls it, every time I ever took that first drink, I was stone cold sober. Right? I can't blame the first drink on being loaded. I make that decision stone cold sober. The craziest, it's funny, I had my guys one time, we all sat down and wrote down, what's the most insane things you've ever done? Give me a list of about 4 or 5 things. Makes for a hell of a discussion, but but none of us put down the single most insane thing any of us have ever done. And based on my experience and my background, the most insane thing that I can do is take another run at it. Is go, I think I'm going to try shooting dope one more time, or I'm going to try drinking one more time. I think I can handle it this time, and I make that decision stone cold sober. That's where this is what happens to me when I'm not drinking. And going back to that Roman numeral 28 in Doctor's Opinion, he talks about it. He says, I'm restless, irritable, and discontented. Now this is sober. This is when I'm not drinking. I get a little restless, I get a little jumpy. I don't like the way my clothes are touching me. If I'm inside sitting down, it feels like I ought to be outside walking around, and I'm like a dog that can't find its spot. I'm circling around, but I don't feel right, and I get a little restless. And then irritable, God almighty. After a couple of weeks, couple of days, whatever it is, I start getting a little irritable, And I never really liked the idea of being irritable. It's funny, I was talking to a sponsor the other day. He goes, I came home from work today. He goes, I was kind of irritated, just supervisor at work. And then I was irritated at Heather and the guy in traffic irritated me. And this is condensed in the conversation. But I said, it's funny. I hear you talking a lot about being irritated, today. And he goes, yeah. And I go, but you probably wouldn't like being described as irritable. And he goes, no, I wouldn't. It's like, I never thought I was irritable, but it's not my fault if I just become keenly aware of how stupid everybody else is, that's just being observant, and before I know it, the guy at work is a dumbass, and my boss is a dumbass, and this guy in front of me in traffic is a moron, and the guy behind my ass is a maniac, and I think that guy just gave me a look, and before long, I'm just a little irritable, and I always say that, I'm in the grocery store. I'm following somebody 3 miles past the exit to my house so I can tell them they're number one, and then, I'm the policeman of the world. It's my job to throw a flag on the field anytime I see a violation anywhere, and if I see position of neutrality is not even part of my, the guy in front of me at the grocery store has got 14 items on the 10-item lane. And the reason I know is because I counted every and on the wrong day, I'm the guy that's going, okay, pal, which 4 of those items you want to put back, And if he comes back with the wrong answer, it's a bad day at the grocery store, And next thing you know, I'm calling the family from jail, and I'm going, how do I get arrested buying milk? I was trying to do the right thing. I just went to the grocery store to get milk for the kids, but somebody's got to say something, to this guy. Somebody's got to draw a line in the sand, and if not me, who? And that's the way it's, and then I get a little discontented. Discontented means I don't like the deal I'm getting. You can give one of us a $150,000 a year job, and inside of 6 months, I'll tell you how I'm getting screwed around. I mean, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm sure from where you're sitting, it looks like I'm making a lot of money, but you should see how much money they're making off of me, and this Nimrod in the next cubicle makes $30,000 a year more than I do, and I'm doing my job and half of his, and before long, I'm the key employee. I'm the one that the whole company is hinged on, and next thing you know, they're marching the key employee out to the curb, scratching that unemployed ass, and I'm going, how can you be firing? This place will crater without me, But I'm discontented. I don't like the way the kids are treating me. I don't like the way my wife's treating me. Somebody could say good morning, and I'm like, oh, are you jacking with me already? And before long, I get this. I need some relief. When I've been sober a little while, I need some relief. And the doctor's opinion, he says, I'm restless, irritable, and discontented unless I can again experience the sense of ease and comfort. That feeling that comes at once from taking a few drinks. And it says, drinks that I see others taking with impunity. You know what impunity means? It means they don't get punished for it. They get to have a couple of drinks, and it doesn't cost them their job and their car and their old lady and their house and all the values they grew up with and in their self-respect and their dignity. They just get to have a couple of drinks. And when I need relief, I start wanting to know, where's mine? Where's mine? How come this Nimrod gets to have a couple of pops after work and I don't? And eventually, when I need relief bad enough, on page 24, it talks about it again. It says, a lot starts happening in 23, 24, 25, 26. It says that I've lost the power of choice in drink. My willpower becomes practically non-existent, and I am unable at certain times to bring into my consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. And that doesn't matter whether it's my suffering and humiliation or my family's suffering and humiliation. When I need relief, I can't think about it. That's why it always kills me when we have they go, we got a new guy, let's have a step one meeting today. And what does everybody talk about? Instead of pulling this guy with the message of the hope of recovery through this process, everybody talks about all the bad stuff that happened to them when they're drinking. I went to prison 22 times, and I started drinking as an embryo, and DWIs. Like we're going to scare this new guy into getting sober. When on page 24, it tells me that my own stuff won't scare me bad enough to keep me sober. It's not like I'm going to be when that's on me. It's not like I'm going to be in the liquor store and going, oh, remember what happened to that guy at the meeting? I don't want any of that. I'm telling myself it ain't going to, or I may not even, by the time I take that first drink, it seems like common sense. It seems like the next logical action is to take a drink because I get so uncomfortable, and it goes on to say, once this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he's probably placed himself beyond human aid. The thing about it is, when I'm working with a new guy, my first job is to give him a fatal dose of alcoholism, what I call a step one experience. And being able to break this stuff down, I can't tell you how many times I've seen guys, the guy that's in treatment for the 15th time, and they'll lean forward in their chair just like I did and go, hold on just a minute. This stuff you're saying, I've never heard it before. And it explains a lot of stuff that I've never been able to explain. There's one question that I ask a lot of guys, and whenever we would promise people we're never going to drink again, and mean it, my family, my people, my work, whatever it is, and I'd swear to God this is it, and then they'd see us drinking again, they'd always ask that question. They'd go, why did you start drinking again? And I'd give them the only answer we got, which is what? I swear to God, it's like a chorus throughout our fellowship. I don't know. God almighty, I don't know. It's just what I do. I drink, I guess, and I hurt people's feelings, and And that's what I'm talking about when I show up here. I thought there was something wrong with me. And when you see that guy all of a sudden go, the stuff you're saying explains a lot of stuff I've never been able to explain. It explains why whenever I start drinking, it always gets away from me, and explains why when I stop, and by God, this time I mean it. This time I'm serious. I'm never going to, that I always drink again. I always say, Alcoholics Anonymous is not for a guy that can make up his mind to stop drinking and pull it off. A guy that can make up his mind to stop drinking doesn't even belong in AA. I mean, they're welcome to come. They can drink the coffee, and they kind of wish they'd keep their mouth shut and not sponsor anybody, but sorry, that was a personal opinion. Because, the guy's welcome in AA, but, you let a drunk like me roll in, a year later, and what works for that guy might kill a drunk like me, because he doesn't have to have a complete psychic change or a spiritual experience. He can just put the plug in the jug, and I don't like to spend a lot of time figuring out whether somebody's a real alcoholic or a hard drinker or that sort of thing, but the book talks about it a little bit. And really most of this stuff, I think the most important thing is to ask myself, what are my current beliefs on this stuff, and are they based on, do they match with what the book is saying? The stuff they're saying in the book, where did I get this belief? And is it consistent with the big book? Well, there is something that happens when all of a sudden I go, what if I'm just a garden variety alcoholic? What if, and I know I got all these complications, and I got things that have happened to me and things that haven't happened to me and that sort of thing, but what if throughout the middle of that, I'm just a garden variety alcoholic, and I have a body that can't drink regular, and I got a mind that, there is something that happens. There is a surrender that takes place in that first step experience. And tied to that surrender is a willingness to go through the rest of the work that's not there when my step one is just an academic statement. When I'm going, yeah, I'm alcoholic, or, whatever that means. There is something that happens when I break down in my heart that I got this thing, and on my own power, I ain't fixing it. On my own, I'm sitting there going, if I got it the way you're describing it, I got no shot. It's like getting in the boxing ring with Mike Tyson. I couldn't beat him with a pocket knife. For me to try to stop alcoholism with willpower is like trying to stop a freight train with a volleyball net. It's just woefully inadequate. But the thing about that first step experience is it drives the rest of my process through the work. We read in that piece of the book that we read before every meeting, how it works. I call it the most often read, least listened to portion of the big book. That's as close as I came to meditation for a while. Was I would go. They go, rarely have we seen a person fail, and boom, I'm out of the room. And then come back in about the time they go, B, that God could and would if, or C, that God could and would if he saw it. But in that thing, it reads, they say we stood at the turning point. We being, most of the time, this is an interesting thing. We talk about we. Who is the we that they're talking about throughout the book? And it's describing the founders of our program, the people that founded it, who had this experience and who found it important enough to put it in book form, or people that have experienced the recovery program and had the complete psychic change is the we we're talking about. It says it in the forward, the first edition. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. But it always cracks me up. We'll definitely talk about the chanting in AA at some point, but it just cracks me. When they read the ninth step promises, and they go, "Are these extravagant promises?" And you got the guys going, "We think not," and I'm like, "Really? Really? Those are not extra? I guess you can just be alone at perfect peace and ease, Fear of economic insecurity is just gone, intuitively know how to handle situations. Damn right, those are extravagant promises, On the other side of it, now it says, we think not. the people that have had the psychic change. But when I'm sitting there, I think when I plop down $10 on a big book, I become part of we, and I'm saying, we think not. And in the meantime, my brain is going, bing, 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 But the thing about this whole step one experience, it's a very powerful piece of the recovery process. But there's no good news in step one. There's no happy ending to step one. I mean, if I explain step one to a guy and he's not a little scared and depressed, either he's not alcoholic, or I haven't done a very good job of describing it, or he's psychotic. Because that would be the short version of. Imagine if we bring a guy in and we go, okay, Bruce, here's the deal. You got a body that ain't regular. When you drink, it's going to trigger this physical reaction to go off on another run. It's a craving that's way bigger than you are, and over any period of time, it's going to get away from you. You're going to drink a lot more than you can successfully handle. It's a big problem. Not your biggest problem, though. You also got a mind that's going to get so uncomfortable that it's going to convince you to drink again every time. Really sorry. Try to have a nice day. But that's all we'd have if we just had step one, But the first 7 pages of Working with Others does a really good job of describing the first visit with the guy. And this is a lot of it, where it says we get talking about drinking. He talks about his drinking. I talk about my drinking. If he's light, I go with jokes. If he's heavy, I talk about serious stuff. But it tells me how to approach this guy. And it says at some point in the conversation, we turn the discussion to alcoholism. And it says, we suggest you do it as we've done it in the chapters on alcohol. And that's this stuff we're talking about. And we start talking about that it's not just that I like to party. It's I got a physical allergy coupled with a mental obsession that adds up to a terrible cycle. When it says on that page 23, it says these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. And that's what this graphic is of the terrible cycle. When I'm trapped in that, I'm going to drink at some point, and I'm going to trigger this phenomenon of craving, and I'm going to drink, and I'm going to drink, and I'm going to drink. But after I drink for a while, things get really bad, and I have to stop. And now I've stopped, and I'm okay. Things are going pretty good. I got a little folding money in my pocket. I'm back in the big bed. Things are, I may not lose the job. But you know what happens after I don't drink for a while? Things get really bad. So eventually I have to drink. So this terrible cycle is I drink until I have to stop, and then I stop until I have to drink. And that's the terrible cycle. That's the seemingly hopeless state of mind. And I always say, if you're stuck in that, there's a bottom below the bottom Whatever, seems crappy this year, the guy might look back in 3 years and go, I wish I'd quit in 2013 when things were still going pretty good. I always tell guys, don't ever say it can't get any worse. All that shows is a lack of imagination. But the reason is, it's interesting that if the book has our whole recovery program laid out in that much of the book, essentially the first 103 pages of the book, it spends that much of it, the doctor's opinion in the first 44 pages, talking about the problem. And then it spends, the next 60 pages talking about the solution. But they spend almost half the text talking about the problem. It's so important that I get that step one experience, because what happens is I actually just circled back around to one. I drifted away from how it works, and I just came back to it. In how it works, we read, we stood at the turning point. The we got me thrown off there for a minute. It says, we stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Do you ever ask yourself, what is that turning point? And it describes it at the bottom of page 25. It says, if you are as alcoholic as we were, we believe there's no middle-of-the-road solution. See if turn these statements into questions. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if I'd passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, I can't stop me, my sponsor can't stop me, my brother, my mother, my probation officer, my best friend, nobody is going to keep me sober on human power. It says we had but two alternatives. This is the turning point, right? It says one was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of my intolerable situation, and the other was to accept spiritual help. That's it. We talk about that all the time. Does it really come down, and do you still believe at 28 years sober, Charlie, that your two choices are die an alcoholic death, live life on a spiritual basis? You know, go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of my intolerable situation, or accept spiritual help. And the reason I love drunks is we're the only group of people that, given those two choices, we go, damn. Yeah, can you tell me a little more about that bitter end? You know, I mean, how bitter is it? And because I sense that I get to drink on my way to the bitter end, you know. And the reason you got to hammer this step one with me is because for a drunk like me, when drinking does for you what it did for me, you got to cut off every loophole, every possible avenue of escape, every little claw, every ounce of wiggle room for me to be trapped in a hopeless state of mind and body. And then it says over on page, I think it's on 26, 27. Oh my God, I love that certain American businessman. You know, Roland Hazard had gone to Carl Jung, and well, this is when we're going to start switching into 22. But it's talking about spirit. You know, that we might think we can do without spiritual help. This Roland Hazard story is fantastic. I mean, he was the guy that had enough money to burn a wet elephant, and I mean he was an investment banker, and I was married to an investment banker. I know how the woman with the place in the Hamptons. This guy, when he realized he had a drinking problem, he went to see Carl Jung. I always say it'd be like going to see, you know, Dr. Phil or Deepak Chopra now or something. I got a problem, I'm going to the big guy, you know. And he gets on a boat and goes to Switzerland. And he spends 45 days with him, and he learns a lot about the inner springs of his mind and that sort of thing. And see if this sounds like one of us getting out of treatment. He says, though experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. His physical and mental condition were unusually good. Above all, he believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. You know, the story is that guy didn't even make it back to the boat. You know, they found him, the way I understand it, they found him on a train in Spain, you know, drunk off his ass. And they bring him back to Carl Jung, and he's asking about it. And Carl Jung says, he was utterly hopeless. This is an awful doctor's visit. You know, he says he'd have to be locked up or have a bodyguard. And he goes on to say, some of our readers may think they can do without spiritual help. Let us tell you the rest of the conversation. The doctor says, you got the mind of a chronic alcoholic. That's what we've just been talking about. You know, the difference between a moderate drinker, hard drinker, real alcoholic. And he goes, check this out for a doctor's visit. He says, I've never seen one single case recover. And he says what any good drunk would say. He goes, is there no exception? You know? Come on, man, this is old Charlie here, you know? I mean, you know, is there? And the doctor says, he goes, well, here and there, once in a while, we've seen people have these spiritual experiences. You know, this is rolling into step 2 now. But he says, to me, they're phenomenon. He goes, they appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. So Carl Jung understood the problem. He told the guy he's a chronic alcoholic, and he even knew what the solution was. He says there are these vital, but he didn't know how to make it happen. I've been organizing an AA golf tournament in Austin for 27 years. We used to have the Legends Legends of Golf. The whole seniors tour was born in Austin, and so I came up with the Legends of Sobriety, and it was really clever when we had the Legends of Golf, but it's been gone for 15 years, so it's just a stupid name for a golf tournament now. But one day we're having the tournament, and the marshal comes up, and he's the guy that is in a little cart. He's supposed to keep everybody moving and make sure you're not driving on the greens and that sort of thing. And the marshal comes up, and we're all kind of waiting at this one hole, and he knows that we're an AA golf tournament. And I'll never forget it. He comes up and he goes, "So you guys are AA?" And I said, "Yeah." And we started talking. He goes, "My dad was a drunk." He goes, "My dad was the angriest, most awful man you'd ever want to be around. He was a racist. He was a bigot. He was just mad at everybody and drank every day of his life. And he goes, and then he's in his 60s. He's in his late 60s, and he got really, really sick. And the whole family went down. He went into a coma. And he said the whole family went down to the hospital, and we were around his bed. And he's laying in the bed. He's completely unconscious. And he says all of a sudden, both his hands went up in the air like this. And he's holding his hands up in the air, and he starts talking to people that we can't see. And he's talking about world hunger and ending world hunger. He's talking about world peace and stuff like that. And then he goes, "I have to leave you now, but a better man is coming to take my place." Whoa! Both his hands just dropped down to the bed, and they thought he was dead. He wasn't dead. He comes out of the coma, and for the rest of his life, he never takes another drink of alcohol. The racism's gone. The bigotry's gone. The anger's gone. Sweetest guy you could ever hope to be around. Keeps a bottle of whiskey under the kitchen sink in case company comes over. Never touches a drop of it for the rest of his life. Complete psychic change. Vital spiritual experience. But imagine the powerlessness that Dr. Young was feeling when he's talking to Roland Hazard saying, "We got to get you one of those." I got no idea how to make it happen. But that's what makes AA a big deal, is that we understand the problem, we know what the solution is, and we have a program of action that'll bring about the solution every time. In the 12th step, it says, having had a spiritual awakening. The only shot that a drunk like me has got is this spiritual awakening. The book describes it as a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience, a personality change sufficient to overcome drinking, a change of heart. Whatever it is, something big has got to happen for a drunk like me to stop getting loaded for a month, much less 28 years or permanently. And we have a program of action that says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. So it's telling me that my only shot is the result of these steps will bring about the only thing that'll help a drunk like me. And the thing that amazes me is now, so many people out there. I was talking at breakfast with some guys. So many people come into AA, they come into a 12-step program now, and we don't work the 12 steps. For a whole bunch of us, this AA thing is going to those meetings and not drinking. And that works really good. If you're a drunk like me, going to meetings and that works right up to the point that I either drink or blow my brains out. So I really was saying at breakfast, I really believe, and I wouldn't put this in the grapevine or anything, but I think people in our fellowship that have worked all 12 steps are in the minority. I think there's a whole bunch of us that haven't. So I like talking about it. But I mean, if I had this terminal cancer that's untreatable, and I go, is there no exception? They said, well, there's a study they're doing up in Seattle where they're having about a 90% success rate, but we don't really know what they're doing. You wouldn't be able to keep me out of Seattle. I'd be selling my house to move to Seattle. But I come in here and I go, I think I'll just work on me for a minute, or that sort of thing. So I like to talk about the importance of this step one, but it drives me in. I don't generally the chapter We Agnostics. I'm really talking about 1 and 2 here, and we're almost done. The thing about 1 and 2 now. The chapter We Agnostics is one of the most powerful pieces of spiritual literature out there. I mean, there is some real depth to that chapter, but it talks an awful lot about laying aside prejudice and looking at my old ideas and asking myself, where did they come from? I don't generally spend a tremendous amount of time in step 2 with a new guy, because I love that line on page 27, because after Carl Jung has, or 28, it says, here was the terrible dilemma in which our friend found himself when he had the extraordinary experience, which, as we have already told you, made him a free man. We, in our turn, sought the same escape with the desperation of a drowning man. That step 1 experience, tied to that desperation, is a willingness that drives me through the rest of the work. If I'm down to die an alcoholic death, live life on a spiritual basis, this solution gets really interesting. I don't know why I'd be interested in a power greater than myself when I still think my power will get the job done. But the moment that I understand in my core that on my own shot, I got no chance, on my own power, I got no shot, then this power gets real interesting. Then I start talking about, when it says we in our turn sought the same escape with the desperation of a drowning man, the thing I love about drowning men is they don't ask a lot of questions. It's like you pull up and I'm drowning, I'm not going to go, tell me about your experience with working with drowning men. I used to think it was really important that I knew what we were going to do, how it's going to go, what it's going to feel like while we're doing it, and what the end result is going to be. And I thought it was really important that I approve of the whole process. When I got that desperation of a drowning man, all you're going to hear out of me is, what do you want me to do? And the next thing you're going to hear is, okay, I did that. Now what do you want me to do? That's when we get this deal going. But we're not going anywhere until I really am driven by this flamethrower at my ass of, Bill used to say we got 2 ultimate authorities in AA. We got, my mother goes to church just for spiritual thirst. We have 2 driving factors. One is God saying, come close to me and I'll take care of you. But we also got whiskey saying, if you screw around with this deal too much, I'll kill you. So it's like, not all of my spiritual endeavor is just out of thirst for being a better guy. There's some survivalist stuff in there, and that's driven by this step 1 experience. Do I believe this is my only shot? Well, we're going to roll into step 3 after the break. But I can't tell you the power of being able to break this stuff down. I mean, being able to sit down with a new guy and being properly armed with the facts about myself. You can set the hook. This is where we set the hook in that first visit. And then it talks about, suppose now you're making your second visit to this guy. He's read this book. He says he's ready to go through with the program of recovery. That's where we find ourselves on a second. And then we let him have it, So let's take about a 15-minute break and get back in here, guys. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Sober Sunrise. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a thumbs up as it will help share the message. Until next time, have a great day.